Hi, everyone. I very much enjoy doing a lot of comedy with my presentations. I find subjects can be very dry sometimes, so hopefully you'll enjoy just as much as I enjoy putting them together. I'll address the elephant in the room. Anyone here a music fan? Wu-Tang Clan? Okay. So my shirt is actually a play on Ghostface Killah, who's one of the founding members of Wu-Tang Clan. Matching socks. So my theme for the talk is, can you fix our UX? My first question is, does anyone know or have they heard of the term UX before? Okay, over here. Okay, perfect. So a little bit about me. My name is Gerrard. I'm a long-forming alumni of the agency space. I left the agency space in business consulting about 8 years ago to start my own company, which is 2020 Digital. And the whole idea of the company is I'm usually brought in when something's gone wrong or a team needs some help with some clarity for a clear path forward. So the 2020 part's more of a double entendre on a play on fixing what's already happened, where you've had the 2020 insight and then the clear path forward. A little bit about myself. I've been working in digital for about 25 years. Started as a developer, have a background in research and HR and operations, which sort of led me to do what I do today. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with new people. So quick show of hands. How many people here are responsible for managing a website or their marketing? Okay. Out of those people, how many feel their website isn't working as well as it could be? Okay. Doug, what's one thing that you would say would make a big improvement?
And we're fixing it to help some experts in the storytelling.
Okay.
I guess that's the biggest critique is because we do a variety of things, it's hard to articulate to people who don't know what Ignite actually does.
Right.
And that's tough to do in a digital way without just throwing content out there.
Yeah.
So it's been a challenge, but I think we're overcoming it pretty quickly.
Glad to hear. Yeah. Okay. Someone else? Anyone else? Their website, what's not working well?
It's not that it's not working well, it's a matter of like there's so much engagement on social media, like driving people to a website is, there's just so much engagement on social media that like the website seems to be a thing you have to have, but is it a thing that people are driving to? Like you link through social media, but it's like I find I look at my website, it's like my social media gets way more action and way more sort of thing. So creating a site that's more engaging or something, like there's obviously a user experience in there that, I don't know, that's what you specialize in.
Yeah, great, thank you. So has anyone been asked, can you fix the UX, either by a customer, by a peer, by another business owner? Yep, well, what's your experience like with that?
I'm currently working for a student-run marketing firm, and we were just hired on by actually StFX's Masters of Adult Education program to modernize their website and their socials and their user experience. But they have no contact of any of the website developers. But that's exactly what all of their major roadblocks are. You look up the program, there's 3 or 4 links that show up that bring you to different parts of the website without valid information, and we believe that it's the main cause of turning a lot of people away from it, because as soon as it becomes challenging for the user to understand the information, they're immediately just going to look somewhere else for something different.
Yeah, it's not an uncommon answer I get. So can you fix your UX? It's a question I get asked all the time. My background is in development and marketing, but I mostly focus on the user experience aspect. So if you think from a marketing campaign or any kind of interaction you have with a brand or a product, hopefully there's some form of thought that went into what that experience is like. And ideally it's curated from end to end, not just for the thing that you're actually doing. So when I'm asked this question, my answer is always yes. Yes, I can fix your UX, whatever that means to you. So that's my talk. Thank you very much for coming.
That was the best 5,000 bucks ever.
the re- The reality is, my answer is always it depends, and it's not one that most people like to hear. Often, I need to understand what UX means to them as an individual and as an organization. So if we're talking about digital products, which will focus mostly on websites today, I need to really understand what that means to you as an organization or an individual. Sometimes when I'm having this conversation, it means the UI, so the user interface. So the buttons, the images that are used, the writing on that. In other aspects, it's a deeper fundamental understanding of how and why decisions were made for a product or a service that's being created or has already been created. So just some sort of quick, interesting facts. 75% of consumers will judge a company's credibility by their website design. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but you're really got to look at how much work or how much potential business you're leaving on the table with not investing constantly with your website. And as Sean mentioned, it's not just a thing, it's a part of your business. It's the online touch point that most people will find you through today. 88% of users that actually use a website are less likely to return if the site is a bad user experience. And in a lot of cases, people don't necessarily know why there's friction or what that bad experience is. They just know that something doesn't feel right to them or they're frustrated. Maybe you think it's clever to, when somebody goes to your homepage, you pop up an interstitial that says sign up for my newsletter. Well, I don't know if I want your newsletter because I don't know anything about you. And you're also making the assumption that I actually want your newsletter. The second thing is when you leave the website and then you come back and it pops up again, or you go to another page on that website and the same thing pops up again, right? You're making it about you and not about the people who are using your product or service. One thing that's true in anything that I've done working in tech is fixing UX isn't just about making things look good. It's really about understanding how people actually use your product or service versus how you think they use it. So this is often a sort of founder's mindset, especially with early stage founders. Maybe you're a technical founder or you're a business founder or a sales founder, and you're making your business due to a need that you've seen in the market that you've then addressed and actually started to build out a product or service around this. The reality is, while that's a good starting point, as Sean mentioned, you always need to be constantly engaging who your customers are and who your potential customers are. Always want to be doing insight and research gathering. So when I think of user experience generally, there's sort of three things that come to mind. One is you got to understand the complete experience, and this is the experience and the interaction that people have with you on all your digital touch points. Again, I'm focusing more on websites, but social, any aspect that a person can actually find you or get information about you. It could even be an article that's written about you or a review about your company. These are all things that you need to be mindful of when you're looking at an overall experience. It goes beyond visuals. So I sort of mentioned earlier that I need to understand what UX means to the person that I'm talking to, because again, sometimes it could just very well mean we just want a visual refresh of our website. And while that is a part of user experience, there's often a lot of bigger, deeper understanding that needs to go into why you're making some of those decisions in the first place. And a large piece of this is around accessibility and the emotional response that your website can generate when a person goes to it. So again, I'll use the interstitial or the pop-up, right? Hey, from a marketing campaign, we can do lead capture and we get a bunch of email addresses. Or you can piss a bunch of people off and maybe they'll never ever return to your website. So you got to sort of think through these strategies and focus less on tactics and things that you think will give you a short-term gain versus a long-term pain point or frustration. And finally, it's understanding how you're going to balance this through business, right? What are your business goals? And you got to look at the entire journey. So we are in very much an age where you're spending more time on digital touch points first. You're learning about businesses. Maybe you're buying products or services. I'm still fairly old school. My background is in research, so I love books. So I still love going to the bookstore to buy physical books. That's part of my user experience when I'm working with or talking to or buying a product from someone. One thing that's still a big pain point for me is you ever walk into a building and they have pull handles on push doors? So those are called Norman doors, and they're a very big point of frustration for most people because your visual is like, oh, I see a handle, I need to pull that door. But this is where you end up having the little hack where they put the label and it says push instead, right? So it's a small user experience piece, but it actually can set the stage for everything else that happens after that. So when I'm working with a team or any kind of an organization or I'm giving a talk like this, One thing I often recommend is start with doing some form of discovery. And Sean went into great detail on this around your customers. For me, it's understanding what I'm stepping into as a consultant when I'm going in to work with a team. But I often recommend you do this internally as well too. So if you're part of a larger team or you work with a network of other teams, what you can actually do is do this as in the buddy system. Have somebody sort of work with you and ask you some questions, gain some insights on your product or services from their perspective. You want to make sure you're getting views that are not your own. And really why this is important is if I look at this quote, clients are really appreciative when we take time to explain each step of the process, especially for complex cases. When you look at this, what's the first impression that someone gets? Anyone? So that's what I'm looking at too. I'm not looking that it's a positive. I'm looking, okay, well, what's the opportunity here, right? So I hear complexity. You're spending staff time and resources on helping walk someone through this process. So where you might look at this as a positive, I look at it as an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper to better understand an organization and how marketing and products play into that overall success. So it's really about looking beyond what the surface provides, and you really need to gather insights. And really what this means is, for any type of project, I'm looking at multiple points of data. So whatever data is available, not all companies have all the same data, and not all data is equal. You can have data manipulated to tell you any story you want, depending on the questions you're asking it. So for me, something simple that you can do is if you're a team of one or a team of two, do a buddy system again, have somebody interview, ask you some basic questions. Or if you're in a position where you actually have a broader team that you're working with, maybe do some sort of surveys. Client feedback submission forms are another great way. Google reviews are another one as well too. And then looking at your analytics for your website. I often recommend not looking at one of these things in isolation. You really need to be in a position where you're looking at multiple points of data so you can make an informed decision based on all the inputs that you have and then any additional information that you might have access to. So next I move on to what I call the reality check. And really, again, if I look at this quote, using multiple systems makes it hard to keep track of everything and really slows down our work. So again, this is an opportunity. I'm looking at a bunch of different things. This is from an actual survey that I sent out for a team that I worked with. I'm looking at understanding the complexity of the systems, where the team's time and energy is put going into managing all these different systems versus where could that time be redistributed to maybe help support customers or grow the business. So it's important because you want to connect any kind of user experience to your organization's reality. You can Google, UX best practices, top 10 lists, and you'll get a bunch of different things that'll probably help you in your business or at least enlighten you on certain aspects of things that you didn't think about before. But the reality is you need to be able to connect these to what your reality is today as a business owner. So for me, again, it's looking at the whole organization, the people in the process that are involved in making some of these decisions, but also working through every aspect of this. So you want to look at what you're able to do today. So you want to be inspirational, look at some of the things you can actually do today, but then plan for tomorrow. Maybe you get to a point where, your two-person company requires some additional support. That's when you may want to look at bringing in very tactical pieces to help you with certain aspects. You also want to look at the capacity and the technological proficiency. I like Sean's Shopify example. For me, way back in the early 2000s, when I was first getting into tech, we still built a lot of websites from scratch. I often recommend the opposite in most cases, especially if you're just starting out. You can leverage a service like Squarespace or one of these other services that get you something that can start the conversation going. When you grow your business a little bit more, or you have more complex needs, then you can look at bringing in a service provider to help support you or build up the skills, however you actually want to do. And the big reason for this is you want to look at where your workflow is from a bottleneck standpoint, right? So I'm still of the headspace where I love to do everything myself. It's not the most cost-effective way of running a business. So I often have to look for support in areas that even though I know how to do certain things, I may not actually have the capacity to do them myself. And then finally, once you have all these inputs, you want to look at ways you can actually make change. And again, another great quote, if there was a way to condense the platform clients need to use, it would make their experiences much less overwhelming. Again, seems like a no-brainer, but when you're inside an organization and you're looking at how some of these tools and systems get put in place, you could have very much started off in one spot, and then over time, you just kept on stitching new pieces to it. So I call it like a Frankenstein's monster, right? So you may have a CRM that's half baked into another system that's stitched together, that's worked into your website. The reality is at some point you're probably going to look at the efficiency losses that you're having with a number of these fragmented systems in place. So it's really about moving beyond what I would consider to be surface level solutions and looking at root causes. And it's never an easy conversation to have, especially if you're very invested in your business. It might be challenging to look at it, well, how can I pull away and actually make some concessions to help grow my business in the future? And really what this boils down to for me is I look at ways to streamline systems that teams are using. The enemy of productivity is a number of complex systems that you have to work with. There's a conversation that I have more than often with teams that have fragmented systems across all different aspects of their business, and the amount of burn rate that they have per month, not even just spending licenses for these systems, but also the amount of people hours that it takes to work and manage these systems doesn't even make any sense. And they're not able to see that because they're so invested into it, and they've hacked these systems so much they have a process down in place that when they do try to onboard somebody new, they're usually not able to actually easily articulate why and how we do stuff versus in their mind when they first did it, it made perfect sense. And this is really getting around, how can you personally engage with your audience as well, and then optimize your website. So again, Sean mentioned constant refinement. I usually recommend bi-weekly. If you're in a position where you can talk to your customers, do that at least bi-weekly. Understand what their pain points are, get some survey, whatever kind of data you can collect from them. Even if it feels uncomfortable or you haven't done it before, just getting started is really the best thing that you can actually do. So a culmination of a lot of the things I just talked about, I recently worked on a fairly large Nova Scotia government project, which will help bring essential healthcare services online. So if you think of everyday services that you might get notices for in the mail, at some point, hopefully in the near future, that'll be all digitized where you can go onto a platform and use these things. So the interesting thing with this project was I came in 9 months after the project was already underway. And again, with my company, they're like, something's wrong, but we don't quite know what it is. So for me, having done this for a long time, I'm able to go in and look at their product, and in about an hour, I can pick out 20 things that I think are the challenges, but then I have to go back and do some discovery, some research, talk to people, talk to any one of these that are stakeholders. What is the team doing? How do they work? What's most effective for them? And it gets me to a point where I can then make more confident recommendations. And those recommendations are usually specific to not just the project, but the team supporting the project behind the scenes. I think that's often a big part that's left out. It's, yes, I can come in and fix your UX on the surface, but let's look at ways where we can reimagine how your teams work together or how you actually prioritize certain things that you want to do from a marketing standpoint. So if I were to sort of give you a top list of what I would consider to be easy UX fixes, these are things that out of 5 conversations I have, they come up 4 times out of the 5. The first one is unclear navigation. Sean touched on this briefly as well too, but really what you're looking at is the labels that you use to describe the content on your website can be very, very critical in how people think or browse for that content themselves. So you may use a word or a phrasing that you think's clever, but it may not be actually how people think about the content or the ways that they think about finding information. And a quick hack that I'll share with you is I did an audit of a website a little while ago. I got 10,000 daily unique visitors. And the biggest challenge that I found was they were very proud of their site search. And I use that as a red flag. I'm like, okay, well, why are people using the site search so much? Are they not able to find the content on your website? So in my research and my testing, it was quicker for me to use Google to find the content on their website I was looking for than actually using their site search. And the reality of this is something as clear as not having clear navigation labels. If someone can't find a product or service based on the way they think about it, they may not necessarily buy something for you or take whatever that next engagement piece is. And an interesting stat that I like to sort of share is, if you think of your website, if you're an e-commerce website and you sell a product or service, if your label is product/catalog, that could turn people away because they may not know what it means. Something as simple as shop, right? You can see almost an increase of 30% in engagement and traffic on your website with a change like that. Again, seems obvious, but the amount of times I had this conversation around sort of where and what led people to doing certain things that they do on their website today, it's very interesting. Easy fix number 2, it's poor form design. So we've all filled out forms. The internet is built on forms. It's an engagement metric that you use for your website. It's how you collect information. It's how you fulfill product purchases. It's how you receive feedback or engage with other people. But if you think of a time, especially on your mobile device, that you've had to fill out a long form, and what I consider to be a long form is something that's 2 or 3 screens in length that I constantly have to scroll to fill in information if I don't have all my information saved in my mobile device. It can be very confusing, especially if we're assuming that a person is doing all this in one sitting, right? So the fantasy or the dream is, you have my full attention while I fill out this form to give you my information. The reality is, I could get a phone call, a distraction, I could leave that page to go to another page. Whatever that scenario is, that can be a big deterrent for people actually completing any kind of interaction that they're doing for your product or service. So if you're looking at like a metric, you can look at your abandonment rate for your checkout, right? If you're selling a product or service online, how many people drop off when they get to the registration piece if you're requiring registration, which you shouldn't. If you look at something simple as, from a marketing standpoint, the old idea was we want to collect as much information as possible as we can from our customers so we can build customer profiles. The more current thinking is collect as little as possible up front and then constantly engage them on an ongoing basis, right? So you're not just making it about you to collect and ingest as much information as you can. You want to make sure that you're removing as many points of friction and barriers as you can to just enough, give them just enough that they need to give you, then you can engage with them on an ongoing basis. Finally, easy fix number 3, hard to read text. This one comes up in 5 out of 5 conversations I have. And really what it means is if you think in terms of your website, if you're working with someone maybe who's more on the creative side, looking at blending colors because they look good is a very different experience than having functional copy on a website. It seems very, very, very basic, but the amount of times I run into light-colored text on light-colored gray backgrounds because it's more aesthetically pleasing is very interesting, even today with a lot of the best practices and guides that are out there. So you take that and then couple it with a mobile device, and not even just text that's hard to read from a color standpoint because there's not enough contrast. The other one is the text sizing. So for myself, being a bit older, wearing glasses more often now than not, when I'm looking at a screen, I appreciate when text is a lot larger because it removes or reduces a barrier for me to actually read the thing that I'm actually engaging with, to understand if it's something that I want to do. There's something that can be said about having small text. People can feel humiliated because they can't read the text and they just abandon and not actually stay on your website anymore. This came up a lot in usability testing for that government project I mentioned. So a basic win, just increase the overall font size. If you think it's too big, bump it up even more and then just test it. If you're looking at mobile, you're looking at equivalent to about 16 pixels on a screen where it's comfortable enough to read. And again, this is assuming that people aren't going into their device and changing font sizes and stuff, just as a best practice out of the gate. Most of your traffic's probably coming from mobile these days. People that are in the more of the content creation space will still use a desktop to create the content, but consumers in any project I've worked on, the majority of their traffic comes from mobile. And here's the thing, everything that I've talked about, and a big theme of everything else you'll hear today, is we're focused around people. So even though I work in tech and digital, I'm in the business of people. I'm in the business of reducing barriers, encouraging conversations, making sure that people can actually have more throughput and more conversations on the other end of the technology piece. How many people here have been playing around with AI tools like ChatGPT? What are some of the use cases you're using it for?
Create content for social media.
Okay.
Planning talks, webinars, things like that.
Yeah.
Business planning, export, strategy.
Yeah. Anyone else? There's someone over here.
Fleshing out business ideas,
Yeah.
potential business ideas, what else is out there.
So for me, I do all the same. As a researcher, I'm using to analyze insights from customer discovery interviews, any other one-on-one conversations I have. If I have a big set of data analytics or survey data, I can punch it all in and build a profile. So I use a tool called Claude. Very similar to a lot of the other ones. Claude's great because it has the concept of projects. So basically what you can do in Claude is you can input all your customer data and insights into a project, and it remembers that in the context of the responses that it gives you, right? So for example, and I would recommend not doing this with proprietary or IP information. Also, nothing that's personally identifying about your customers. So you can anonymize data that you put into it just enough where you can still get the insights. use a paid version of these accounts because their promise is they won't use your data to train their models, right? So that's the promise. I'm still very cautious when I'm doing this. But also if you're using this and using it on client projects, make sure you have some sort of AI disclosure agreement so they're aware of what you're actually using AI for. So with all those boxes checked, I can build a project around understanding my customers and my audience, but I can also build a similar profile for understanding the team that I'm working with. And I can do that through one-on-one coffee chats where I'm learning about them, their role, and what the organization, the products and service do through their perspective. And from there, I can build customer profiles, audience profiles. I can input my brand guidelines. I can input survey results, Google customer reviews, and then I can start to build stories and analyze and understand the data. And it's not just about putting it in and getting output. It's really using it as a tool to better understand people. This picture always gives me a little chuckle with the cat with the ears. You know, when you're designing it, it seems cool. Maybe it was never meant to be a functional cup to drink out of, but you know, from a user experience standpoint, you wouldn't want to poke yourself in the eyes. And anything that you're doing, even the stuff that you're hearing today, the big thing is one size does not fit all, right? There's going to be many inspirational things you hear and hopefully you take away from today. But for me, everything's contextual. Like the same strategies that I would recommend for company A, team B, or organization C may all very well be different. It takes the time to understand the people behind it, what their motivations and what their drivers are, and what they're hoping to accomplish. So I do this by starting with asking questions. And I like, again, how Sean said this, I ask more questions and listen than I speak. When I'm in a 45-minute one-on-one interview with a customer or potential customer, I'm speaking for like 5 minutes. And I'm using a tool like Otter that actually gives me insights of how much time I spoke versus how much the other person spoke. Because that session isn't about me, it's about the person that I'm speaking to gain as much insights as I can from them. So all your marketing initiatives become a lot easier when you have this type of foundation, and it puts you in a position where you can be more confident and more informed with the decisions that you're making. So when I am asked, can I fix your UX? My answer is yes, but it depends. Thank you. I usually use both hands as well, so the mics I knew are a headset, so I'm just like, eh.
Thank you. Yeah, over here.
No, that was great. One of the things that I'm wanting to ask now is, you spoke a lot about websites, and I'm trying to figure out a lot of the websites that have apps or applications kind of like embedded in them. How do you see that UX translating from kind of that website to an application where you're able to almost like interact as if it was like an app, like an Uber kind of style thing? How do you translate between the two?
So, great question. One of the things that I do from a consulting standpoint is I go into early stage startups and I look to optimize their team and their processes. And really what that means is I look at where they're spending their most time, and I can often make recommendations on how they can make small tweaks to improve their workflow. This is topical because if the company or the organization that I'm working with has an in-house design team, one of the first things I look at is how much time is being spent on creating digital assets, right? Because what ends up happening in some cases, the team's really passionate about the problem they're solving, so they want to custom create everything. The reality is, especially at an early stage startup, you got to look at what your burn rate is per month and where all those hours are going. So this is where we get into doing and leveraging things like frameworks or design systems. So a framework or a design system isn't meant to replace usability testing, best practices. It's meant to give you a foot in the right direction to build your foundation. We're in a stage where there's so much access to research and good insights on best practices and things that you can do from a guiding standpoint. I focus less on this is the best practice for forums and more about what's the context in which we can use this for your product or service without changing it too much. So to answer your question, we're in a great position where you can leverage a lot of these big companies design systems like an Uber or other ones. They release their design systems for free, and you can actually look and understand how they think about design and interactions in particular, right down to the micro interactions of every single step along the way. So I would often look to invest in thinking and understanding systems as opposed to, I want to custom create a graphic or a button for every single interaction along the way. Your burn rate won't allow for it, but more importantly, if you're focusing more on the business outcomes and using design and development as tools to help you reach those, put you in a much better position competitively. Great question.
I'm allowed to ask questions too. So, a comment first. The idea of contrast and color and all that. My wife and I were at a restaurant last night, and both of us are old, and we're looking at this menu, and looking at each other and saying, "Can you see this?" Because they dim the lighting, they don't have contrast. Menu looks beautiful in plain sight, but we couldn't read the menu, so
Not
we've got our
functional.
phones out there. So we're easily identifiable as the old people in the room because we got our phone. Yeah, I couldn't think. Yeah, there's so many factors as you age that prevent you. But that was a good point. But I also think, as I'm looking at this menu, I'm starting to choose by the pictures that I see. I wonder if you can comment on the importance of imagery on your interfaces and on the website. How important in your experience is that in your thoughts around UX?
Yeah, it's visual cues, right? Like, what's the easiest thing that a person can immediately notice to then take the next step of whatever that is? And a great example I can give you is when we were designing, or when I was helping redesign this health product. Some of the interface elements use things that I would know what they are, like a floppy disk for save. But the majority of people today wouldn't necessarily know that. Or if you have a call, having an old school telephone, like I know what that is, but I've asked my son Nathan, he's like, what is that thing? So the imagery helps with the recognition, but also helps get a more of an emotional attachment if you're looking at visuals. From a tactical standpoint, labels and words actually help support the images because I'm looking for cues to see if it's the right thing I'm looking at, and then the visual helps reinforce it. An old basic one is people click pictures, not words, right? So you still sort of think about that. Unless there's no words, or unless there's no pictures, then they'll click words. So your visuals actually, in a large majority of cases, can sell an experience. And to your point about the menu, I'm the same way. My wife, when we go out together, she now has this sixth sense of looking at bad experiences and always tells me, I can never unsee these things now because you've expressed them to me. And she's like, I've had feelings and words for them, but I didn't have a way to describe what they were. So visuals can make or break any kind of an experience. And going back to my agency days working in travel and tourism, that's basically what sold an experience, right? Even if it's a package or a destination, well shot, well curated imagery, either it's for a product or an experience, can make or break the difference in conversions for that.
And the other thing, since my wife's not here, I can make fun of her, but I caught her 2 weeks ago trying to enlarge print on a magazine on the plane. So it's a weird scenario we're in. Yeah.
Jamie, we talk to our clients about this, and I don't like doing websites because they're, as you know, very complex and there's a lot to them, but the whole idea about a website not being ever done. Can you just talk to folks about kind of that mindset, that model and approach of sites just never being finished?
Yeah, great question. I'll give you a bit of a longer short story. So I worked with I do a fair bit of work in legal tech. So I work with a law firm, but I also work with a legal tech startup. We started by building their MVP for their product a few years ago. They've had a lot of great success. They're getting good market penetration. They're getting a huge uptick in actual usage of the product. They liked the experience of working with us so much that we ended up last year doing a rebrand for them and a website refresh from a digital touch point. Very clear up front that when the website launches, that's just the start of the dance. That's not the end of the dance. So it's ongoing refinement, understanding what's working, testing, and more testing. And they can seem very overwhelming, like, oh, we don't have access to people or make too much time or money. But the reality is, if you make your website more of a set and forget, that's going to be less successful for you in the long term, as opposed to constantly refining and reimagining what your product or vision is. And a very basic thing for your website is to look at language. Have somebody that maybe is not familiar with your product or brand, have them land on your homepage and ask them, do you know what I do, or do you know what our business does? If the answer is no, or if there's some hesitation, that's an opportunity for ongoing testing. From an actual physical testing standpoint, you can work into doing 1 or 2 tests once a month. So I always recommend launch the website, we got proper measurement, we know how we're measuring and determining success. We're looking at the outside for business, and we're looking at inside from a team standpoint, because it's not only the people that are responsible for marketing, but it's all the roles that play an important aspect on the inside, supporting the business as well too, right? So, maybe your customer success team points people to the website to get more information. Ongoing testing and refinement can simply start as a couple hours a month, and then you can just build up your confidence and trust over time over that. So it's never done. If you're doing it as a set and forget, there's probably an opportunity to constantly refine and actually measure it back to how it's impacting your business.
So I had a question. What would you recommend for someone that's trying to, they're trying to sell a product online, but I'd be the one that's creating the website. Would Shopify or Squarespace be better for someone that's has no background in creating a website and also they want to sell a product?
My first bet would be Shopify.
Okay.
Second bet would be Squarespace. I've recommended a lot of people use Squarespace. They'll come to me and ask me about helping with their strategy and their business, and I'm like, you know what, I'm probably not a good fit for you because of these reasons. We can actually probably do this in a couple of hours. So these tools are designed very intuitively to actually build out these sites, and you can just iterate on them over time. The reason why I recommended Shopify first and Squarespace second, if you're not selling a product initially, getting a site up fairly quickly with Squarespace is literally a matter of probably an hour's worth of your time. Putting your copy, they actually even have assistive tools now to actually do all this for you as well. Don't recommend using AI-generated content or imagery, but it can give you at least a starting point to understand how to do that stuff. The benefit with Squarespace, in my experience, is you can build more onto it afterwards. So maybe your site starts as more of a brochure website or a content generation website. You can actually add components on through their interface that have an online e-commerce piece, that have a gated content section, that have other community pieces or video editing and stuff like that over time. But if you have a product today and you want to test the market, you can get it up on Spotify or Shopify really quick, or try Etsy or even Amazon or one of these other places as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great question.
Any other questions?
You provided some information on testing if you're a digital company. There's quite a few non-digital product companies here. What am I doing testing my website if I don't have a digital asset?
Yeah, so a big part of my business is end-to-end service design, and really what that means is I'm looking at not just digital touch points. I understand, and the people I work with understand, that digital more often than not can be a touch point for their customers as part of their journey. A great example I can give you is I do a lot of work with the credit union ecosystem in Atlantic, Canada. And last year I worked on a fairly large initiative with one of the larger credit unions on helping them reimagine their member experience. So while there was a digital component, our work was focused more on reimagining how their service experience was in interacting with their members. And what we did in that instance was I do what I call service scenarios. So a service scenario is a way that you can do sort of a creative role play to test out a service or an experience, or even if it's a physical product, and just recreate what that experience is like from a first-time person coming to use it or experience it versus a returning person. And you can gain a lot of insights from doing that prototyping and testing early and often, even before you launch a product or service, or ongoing, again, once a month I would recommend. If you can bring in a person or two once a month that's either a current customer or a past customer into a physical spot to actually do some testing, that's great. If you can't do that, remote still works as well too. Great question.
Right here. Oh, yeah.
We have a website, and we don't get much traffic to it, so I need to put some time into work on that. But a lot of our clients come to us through social media.
Mm-hmm.
Our main goal is, if you discover us, we want you to book a call so we can, figure out if we can work with them or not. In order to get people from our socials onto our website and then to book a call, what would you recommend as best practices? Because you mentioned less info as possible. Usually we'd get them to a Calendly link, but then that's an extra page, more steps, and I'm not really a fan of that. But.
Yeah, so social's my primary driver for business as well. When I first went out and started my consulting, I didn't have a website for 4 years. And people are like, but this is what you do. Why don't you have a website? And I'm like, 100% of my business is referral based, and it's also through organic from social. So LinkedIn's my primary social driver for business. Whatever is the least amount of steps for that person to interact with you. So it could be even as simple as, depending on the social channel you're on, LinkedIn, for example, I have an option to book a call with me right from LinkedIn. Or depending on what the content is that's leading them to a landing page. I know people love Calendly. I loathe it. You're putting the work on me to pick a time to talk with you when I'm looking to do business with you, as opposed to you thinking it's convenient for you. Yeah, it is more convenient for you, but it's not convenient for me, because now I have to sort of think, I want you to do that work if I'm looking to engage with you. So I would say generally, whatever the least amount of steps to get the person to do the thing that you hopefully nudge them towards is the best way. If it's one button that just gives them a time, just do that. Or if it's just a landing page that maybe they don't want to book something, maybe they want to email you first and learn a bit more about you. It really depends on how you actually do that. But like for me, LinkedIn or social, if you're Instagram or whatever the channel is, DMs are a big piece as well too, so you can keep them open to talk to people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anthony's going to double dip. You go.
No, I'm just trying to follow up on that, pick a time side. I'm usually more on the sales side, so I tend to want to almost command that by giving them almost like 2 times, right? It's like you only have 2 options, it's a bread or eggs or something like that. And you get to pick one. And if they don't, they can suggest whatever time there is. And I think I agree with you on the Calendly. It's just, I see too many times, and I have been on that situation where I see all the times and I'm like, I'm not doing this. Because how do I know which one it is? So I do agree that doing that, but the challenge is, how do you put that in such a way where they've not spoken with you, they're visiting your site, and now you want to give them only 2 options to pick. Like, from the UX point of view, what is that rationale that we can utilize to make sure that we're making it simple, we're making it engaging, and we're making it clear what the options are?
So I'm sure this will be talked about more on the CRM side and how you do that customer relationship management. But for me, it's still the one-on-one communication. It's whatever the starting point that gets the person to the dance, and then it's how you engage with them afterwards. So the Calendly thing is interesting. I'm not picking on Calendly. But if I go to someone's website and they give me an entire week's worth of all availability, that might have been a yellow flag too, because I'm like, oh, you're always available. So, so for me, it's very much, I focus on, I have a lead generation form on my website that I can track where leads are coming from, but also through LinkedIn. I take the time to actually respond as a human, not with an automated approach. Again, that doesn't scale, but luckily I don't have to scale it too much beyond my own means. And I'm not answering your question exactly, but I want that human connection. I want them to send me a message knowing that I'm actually going to receive it. It's not going to go into a system and get prioritized based on X, Y, Z. I'm going to respond with a personalized message that I actually wrote to have that engagement with that person.
Great, thank you very much, Jamie. You got one, Josh? We got 1 minute.
I liked your form section. We have a B2B service we offer that was kind of easy to get to the top of Google, and because it's not a very competitive industry with respect to marketing. And now we have a lot of really bad leads coming in because we're really easy to find. So I'm trying to strike a balance between better qualifying the leads with a longer form with the right information and little asterisks that say, by the way, if you're located in Toronto or Calgary, we're probably not the solution for you, while also trying not to deter people from leaving. Do you have any thoughts on how to better qualify leads to kind of slow down the crappy traffic?
There's two interesting things there. So one is the top of Google. I don't know about anyone else. I don't use Google to do searches anymore. I'll use one of the chat systems, especially because they can do live searching now. So an interesting thing is, from a marketing standpoint, when we were looking in the past to optimize content just for search findability and like your Googles or your Bings, we're now doing it for LLM optimization as well too, where we're looking at ways to make sure that our content gets indexed in the LLM so it can attribute that traffic back to our website or our content. So large language model. So it's the things that ChatGPT use to have as much knowledge as they have. So basically what happens is when you're using one of these chat services, if you don't have a paid license, every keystroke you input into that ChatGPT, it actually uses that information and trains their model to be smarter, to be more effective next time. So what's happening now is you can actually optimize your website content, like long form content or white papers or whatever, to intentionally be picked up for these LLMs to then have more search visibility. To answer your actual question is, again, I go on the human side of the experience. So it's not about asking more inputs, it's about asking the right ones. And the only way you can really know what those are for you in your business are to experiment. So this is where you get into doing some variation testing for your lead generation forms, right? So for me, I always start with what is the absolute bare minimum amount of information I need to have a conversation with this person. And then I go from there. If it doesn't work and I need a bit more qualified leads, because similar to you, I get a lot of requests to outsource part of my business. I have no interest in any of that. So you can set up flags and filters in your email to route those. So you can do it on the back end side, on the website side, or the form or the lead generation side. I would just look to sort of look at your data from the previous month, see what leads are and where they're coming from. Also knowing too that it's usually not a person that's filling those out. These are bots that batch submit stuff to web forms. So there might even be another layer that you can have that's a layer of protection in between to make sure that some of that spam doesn't even get to you on the hosting side.
Would not a strong call-up work as well? Follow-up, calling out who you want the customer to be?
Yeah, people don't read on the internet, unfortunately. Some do, but mostly people read headlines and bullet points, right? So even if you explicitly, so yes, I definitely agree. Your messaging is absolutely critical, and you need to make sure that that's where it needs to be. That can help deter some of those. But there's other instances where they'll just fill out your form anyways. Because again, we're assuming that it's an actual human on the other end, and it's not a generated system that's actually just looking for forms and scraping content and submitting them.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's all going through like our submission on our website, and it's just filling my inbox with like, it's just such a chore that's creating clutter that makes it harder to sit through. So that's something that I could.
Yeah, if you use I'm not a Microsoft shop, but some of the teams I work with are Microsoft shops, and they just have I don't know what the term they use. I don't know if it's filters or rules for routing emails that come in. So some of them just go and they never get, and they're intelligent, so they learn over time. So they can flag certain like types of email addresses, and they can flag certain words, and they can not get that in your inbox. There's also stuff you can do on the server level on your website that can be another layer. So it's all about layers. It's about asking the right questions, making sure you get the right forms, the form inputs, then it's having that layer in between that before it's sent, and then it's what happens after it's sent.